First, though, I'm keen for your take on this developing news out of Canada. They've announced just in the last few hours that it's banning AstraZeneca vaccines for under 55s. It's making that decision apparently on what it says is evidence from Europe about potential side effects like blood clotting, in particular targeting young women. How concerning is this move from Canada?
Look, the move from Canada is based on the same reports that we've heard over the last couple of weeks of very, very rare complications possibly associated with the vaccine. They're conditions that we don't normally see in young women and therefore very concerning, but at a rate of around 1 per million. Now, when you look at the risk and benefit for each individual of having a vaccine, a 1 in a million sounds pretty rare, but it does need to be taken into account when you look at how severe the virus is in that younger population as well. The message, though, I think for Australians is that we do have a strong independent regulator that is looking at all the data from all over the world, and they will make very clear recommendations to us as a community when the data comes in as to if there is any concern around this vaccine.
So just to clarify, we haven't seen any side effects like that here in Australia so far. Is that the case? And what would you say to people who are worried about this blood clot issue as to how authorities are sort of mitigating that? And health workers, GPs, what the plan is in place to notice this if it does happen and deal with it and manage it?
So the issue has been looked at by our regulator and also by the committee, the lead committee that looks at all vaccine-related issues and makes recommendations. And they've said to doctors, maybe hold off for the moment on vaccinating certain individuals with very high risk of clotting from certain disorders. But otherwise, at this stage, there is no safety concern in Australia. We've not actually seen a single case of these very, very rare types of thrombosis reported in Australia as yet. And it's worth remembering too that our rollout at the moment is largely focusing on our older population, people over the age of 70 years of age. But of course, we do have a lot of younger healthcare workers and quarantine workers who've already been vaccinated with both the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines. And so far, we've seen nothing of concern in terms of thromboses. But I'll say again, we are looking very carefully at what's happening in Europe. There have been many, many millions of these vaccines administered to people around the world. And it's very important that we understand, is there an issue? If there is an issue, is it in a certain group of people with a certain set of health conditions already? Or is it could it happen to anyone? And then is it associated with a particular batch or a particular factory? Or is this something that applies to all AstraZeneca vaccines or even all vaccines against coronavirus, full stop? And these are things that we just don't know at this stage. But I'll say again, 1 in a million is so rare that it's a no-brainer when you look at the risk and the benefit of this vaccine. The harms that are caused by the virus, a 1 in a million risk, even if it is real and associated with the vaccines, is still something that shouldn't stop us rolling out the vaccine to the community.
Yeah, and we should make the point that Canada, I think, has 3 other vaccines at its disposal for use, so it does have other options, which is why perhaps it was so quick to be able to stop the AstraZeneca rollout there. Let's return to what's happening in Queensland. I think a lot of Australians would have been surprised to learn that health workers who haven't been vaccinated are still being able to treat COVID patients. That's something that the Queensland health authorities are moving to stop. New guidelines as of tomorrow says that only vaccinated health workers can deal with COVID patients. Why hasn't that happened before now?
I think the reason that hasn't happened so far is that they hadn't actually completed the task of vaccinating those frontline healthcare workers. And at the time, this doctor and probably the nurses as well have contracted COVID. They were only at about 50% of those frontline healthcare workers. And that was, I have to say, somewhat disappointing. But the other thing of concern is that these individuals appear to have contracted the virus in the workplace, which should not have happened with appropriate personal protective equipment. And we've not yet heard from the Queensland government as to why that happened, where the breakdown occurred, because we cannot rely just on vaccines. We know that this virus is mutating and that the vaccines are not 100% effective. In fact, they're not effective at all against certain strains of the virus. So we have a lot to do. We cannot be complacent. And issues like personal protective equipment are absolutely critical in our fight against the virus.
Do you expect other state and territory health authorities will now be implementing similar rules? I'm sure that people sitting in other states around Australia are wondering, well, are our health workers being, having to be vaccinated to work with COVID patients? Surely that should be a national guideline.
Yes, I think other states will move in this direction as they also complete their vaccination program, or at least the first dose for people in that phase 1A. That's the frontline healthcare and quarantine workers. And it makes good sense for those people who are at most risk of contracting COVID in the workplace to be vaccinated, even though we're not 100% sure of how effective the vaccines are at stopping them contracting it or giving it to someone else. But it's likely they're at least partially effective. So that will be an important step in our, in the wall that stands between us and the rest of the world. We've got to keep working, though, on the personal protective equipment as well. And that's something that, in terms of testing all their healthcare workers for the appropriate types of masks and even providing those masks for everybody dealing with COVID patients, most states are not yet up to what we believe is an acceptable standard there. And there's much more work to be done.
How is the GP rollout of the vaccine going? Is it good enough that some over 70s are being told that they need to wait 4, 5, 6 weeks until they're able to get in for a vaccination appointment?
But the reality, Ash, is that we just don't have enough vaccine to vaccinate everybody who's even in this phase 1B at this stage. The factories in Melbourne are rolling the vaccine out, but they're still ramping up their production. And we are confident that our GPs are ready, able and willing to step up as there is more vaccine available to be given to those over the age of 70 and living with chronic diseases. It is going to take us months and months to work through this vaccination program. So we would encourage patients, and I know it is very frustrating that appointments are not as easily available as many people would like. I completely understand the urgency that people are feeling and the fact that they'll feel so much more comfortable once they've been successfully vaccinated. But we just have to get these factories up and running. And once the vaccine's produced, it'll go out through general practice. And we're confident that we'll be in a very different place in a few months' time.
Let's hope so. Dr. Omar Khorshid, the AMA President. Appreciate your time as always. Thanks.
Thanks, Ash.